Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Lilly. I'm the Chairman and Managing Director of the People's Mosquito. Some of you know me very well. I'm sure many of us have met. And for those of you who've not for the first time, then welcome to our first ever live webinar. So this is brand new for TPM. Hopefully you're going to enjoy several hours of entertainment this afternoon. Looking at the chat comments on YouTube, I can see that most of the UK is got some very fine rain or drizzle going along. So hopefully we'll be able to brighten your afternoon up considerably. It is our first time we've ever done this, so just bear with us if we get one or two technical issues. We have been practicing furiously, but you never know. First time we learn something brand new all the time, and we'd love to hear your feedback either throughout the session using the chat group, or give us a message afterwards on the usual channels where you can get hold of us, etc. Okay. So in terms of today's agenda, a couple of changes around. First of all, I'm going to go through a little bit of a welcome and an update on where we are with the project at the moment, and then we're going to get straight into today's guests. And I'll be delighted that we'll be joined by TPM's patron, Arthur Williams. Arthur needs no introduction in terms of his love for the Mosquito, but also recently his Channel 4 television series, Flying Around Britain. Then we're going to have a short comfort break, where before then we take on the first of our veterans in terms of talking, and I'll be giving them a Q&A interview, and you'll also have the chance as well to post any questions you'd like to do to give to Des, and also to Colin Bell later on. Really looking forward to this. Des will be talking about his experiences flying the Mark 18 Mosquito, commonly known as the Tetsi, but also about Highball, which was the first of Barnes Wallace's bouncing bomb projects, and very much being developed hand in hand with the famous Dam Busters raid. So a great guest there. Unfortunately, as advertised, Guy Black is not able to join us this afternoon. Fortunately, he needed to have a procedure, and that came forward a bit more quicker than normal. He's absolutely fine, and we look forward to Guy joining us for a second of these sessions we hope to bring you in the future. So Guy sends his apologies, but as you can see, we've filled the next sort of 3.5 hours with hopefully some great guests to keep you entertained. So after Des, we're going to have a session with TPM's own operator Bill Ramsey, Wing Commander Bill Ramsey. Bill will take us through his display pilot story, and he's displayed a number of aeroplanes from the Lancaster, the Hawk with the red arrows, and more recently and famously Vulcan XH558. So Bill will take us through that, and then following this we'll have a short comfort break before we're joined by the last of our guests, which is Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell. Colin flew over 50 Mosquito operations in World War II, and also ferried Canadian-built Mosquitoes across the pond, which is by no means a small feat, as you can all agree. Okay. Again, opportunities to ask questions. I'll be looking down here. If you see me looking down, I'm looking at your YouTube comments coming through. We do appreciate that very much. And we're also recording the event. We noted that, and thank you for all those people sending messages from all over the world. Unfortunately, not able to join us today. Recording this event as well, and so we can share it out. Actually, what I'd like you to do is also share out the messages from today to help us with this project to raise funds to rebuild your UK Mosquito to the skies. Okay, getting into project update then. So I thought we'd start off today really just giving those of you that know us very well, probably have seen a lot of our newsletters, and keeping updated where the project is. If you're not aware, and this is new news to you, then fantastic. If you have seen some of these comments before, apologies, but we just thought it would be absolutely appropriate to update you in terms of where we are with the project today. So since we've been raising funds in earnest really around 2014, we've now reached an excess of over £500,000 raised, which is a great achievement, but they would like to see that £500,000 a year, of course. We own and have registered a Mosquito airframe, which is a B-35 aircraft post-war. Sorry, not B-35, an NS-36. I can hear my fellow directors correcting me now. Which crashed post-war at RAF Coltishall. We've acquired the remains of that aeroplane, and as a registration number there, it is pre-registered with the UK CAA authority, appropriately FBVI. Those of you know your Mosquitoes, that's FB6 in terms of mark. And so although our airplane was a night fighter originally, in a poll we did around 2014, 2015, more than 3 votes to 1 said, please rebuild as a Mark 6. So that is the one that we are going with and to take forward. A lot of you will know that we own the world's largest collection of the original Mosquito drawings, over 22,300. We've spent, gosh, I think around £4,000 digitising those drawings. We get weekly a lot of requests from anybody from modelers all the way up to other warbird operators to share and download and use the drawings as well. We don't have all of them. I think we've got around about 92, 93%. And so, you know, but we have a substantial amount to make progress on this project. In addition, we're also in touch with other operators and other Mosquito projects around the world to support that. A massive bonus for the project was the announcement, after a lot of work and discussion, that Airbus sponsor us. So, you know, we're very proud of that work, and it's also a testament to all the directors and trustees and volunteers' work that an organisation such as Airbus would recognise this project as one that they would like to put their name to. That has come with some money, which I'm not allowed to disclose. But as you can appreciate, the current situation with the world's economy, it's pretty tough raising funds from any sponsor, never mind, you know, asking you guys out there as the public as well. Saying that, Airbus remain a great partner to us, and it's worth noting that currently up at Airbus Chester, where wings are made for things like the A380, I think A350 and other Airbus aircraft, you know, that Mosquitoes were produced up there at what was known as Harweden, before it was known as Airbus Chester, and post-war, several hundred Mosquitoes were built there. So as you can imagine, the ties to the project are very close within the UK. So in terms of where we are this year, despite the global pandemic, we launched Operation Jericho 2020. So Operation Jericho is the famous name given, I think, more of the publicity to the operation, to the famous raid on the Amiens prison in February of 1944, low-level precision strike, you know, which is what the Mosquito has become famous for. Mosquito is the world's first multi-role combat aircraft. So we decided that as we're getting into the engineering campaign of the project, that we wanted to name each fundraising campaign after a Mosquito operation in World War II. And the first of those campaigns is Operation Jericho 2020. Despite the global pandemic, we've raised coming up to £145,000 this year from April. And to everybody that's donated, if you're on the call or you're listening to this recording, then a massive thank you from all of us at the People's Mosquito for that. And it's been fantastic, and it's been probably our best year so far. And that's without attending air shows, where we get a lot of interest of people signing up to the newsletter, joining the TPM club, and buying merchandise and donating money. But we need about another 100,000 to finish off that campaign. That campaign is focused on getting the Mosquito fuselage molds done, which we've been advertising and communicating the progress of that, particularly if you're signed up to the newsletter. Okay, so we need to finish off those molds, and those of you who know how a Mosquito is built, that is the secret ingredient. No mold, no Mosquito. Yeah, we've got wing jigs, we have tail jigs, we have Bombay door jigs, we've got all the tooling. We acquired a lot of this stuff from an operator down in New Zealand last year, and that's sitting there waiting. But we decided to go with the fuselage molds first because that defines that iconic, sleek fuselage, very smooth, very fast. It's what it is. But as you can see, we are turning a lot of money raised into the engineering side. So we've, invested over £225,000, or spent, I rather would say, but I think investment's a better word, into where we are today. So we need a good 100,000 to get those molds done, and that will also include as well Sitka spruce. And we've had our first delivery of Canadian Sitka spruce from our friends at Touchwood BV, a Dutch company, who are supplying us Sitka spruce from the original Canadian forests, the same region from World War II. And those of you, again, have seen the newsletter, you've seen us post photographs of the logging mill, the quality of the spruce wood. Yeah, so we are reliving history with this aeroplane, and our first several pallets of spruce were delivered, which is very exciting and taking it forward. So as you can see, we've made a really good start to this year, and we're very close to finishing the molds. And then the next campaign will be raising money for the ply, the balsa, to start on the fuselage itself. Okay. Those of you who don't know that the kind of like target budget is probably in excess of around £8 million to get this done. But the more direct donations we get, that figure could come down. We do factor about 20-25% of funds for fundraising in there and operating costs. In terms of operating costs, I have to tell you that we run, the modern word is lean organisation. I'm not a lean managing director, as you can see, but we run a lean organisation. Okay, sure. And so that means everybody that is working on this project is doing this absolutely on their own time. Their own time. We're all volunteers. We draw no salaries, minimal costs when we go to air shows. And therefore we are very conscious to turn every penny that you give us, whether you buy a t-shirt or you donate £5,000 to be part of our Platinum Club on the mould campaign, we're channeling as much as that money into this project. We're a very open book. We're a registered charity, and every year our accounts are out there for public you to look at on the Charity Commission website. Okay. Thank you. So that's an update from me, and I think we can start to welcome our next guest, or sorry, our first guest, our patron Arthur Williams.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. Very well. Good to be here, and great to hear your progress report with the Mosquito as well. It always sort of, I don't know, makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside knowing how well it's all doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, just for everyone's benefit, after this year, I rang him up and said, Arthur, I've got a proposition for you. And he said, oh yeah, what's that, John? I said, well, our previous patron was the very late but absolutely lovable and brilliant Captain Eric Winkle-Brown. So he needs no introduction. And we'd not had a patron since Eric sadly passed away from us and stuff. So I said, Arthur, you seem perfect for us. You love the Mosquito. And would you join? And I'm pleased to say, without any hesitation, Arthur agreed. So thank you very much and welcome aboard.
No, it's great. No,
okay.
Yeah, glad that you asked. Although big boots to fill with.
So I think, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the first question that people will potentially ask is, Why is the Mosquito special for you?
Mosquito special for me, I think, because as an avid av geek and aviation enthusiast, it kind of, I don't know, it's got to be the most beautiful aeroplane ever created, without a doubt. You know, it's 2 Merlin engines, that sleek de Havilland design that you were explaining when you were talking about the molds, John. It's the capabilities of the aircraft, its speed, what it must feel like for a pilot to fly this sort of super fast combination, sort of middle ground between a bomber and a fighter. I don't know. Aeroplanes have to look good for me, and then the performance and everything else comes as a secondary. And then the Mosquito just looks so great. And I remember falling in love with it from some of my earliest years. You know, Granddad's collection of wartime books and things, and I could look through the reference books and materials and see these lovely aeroplanes. And I saw the Mosquito, and I just thought that was great. Built a model of it, but as you may well know, it's got more of a kind of. I really can appreciate the beauty of this aircraft, having been lucky enough to fly in the thing, which I'm sure we'll get on to. But that was kind of, we all dream. I bet you everybody that's watching this now dreams of having the opportunity to see the aircraft flying, let alone go in it. But that happened for me in 2013, and I'm so pleased to be able to report that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the expectation lived up to it. It was amazing experience. So it's sometimes hard to put into words why something means so much to you, but the Mosquito just does.
I think there's an old saying: if it looks right and if it flies right, yeah. And I think that comes across in this design. And you're right. I mean, um, it, as I said in the introduction, it's the world's multi-role combat aircraft. It didn't start out that way. It started out as a fast, lightweight bomber, and one at the time that went in the face of convention and being unarmed as well. So it relied on its speed and its sleekness. Did you get any sense of that speed when you went up? I mean, yeah, just for everyone's benefit, you went across to the United States and that documentary filmed, wasn't it? And it was Jerry Yegan's aircraft that you flew in.
Yeah,
for those of us who like serial numbers, KA114. Yeah.
KA114 at Virginia Beach, and what a collection he has. He has sort of like most people who are extremely fortunate millionaires say, oh yeah, I own a Spitfire, I own a Warbird of some description. Jerry Yegan over in America owns tens of thousands of square feet of hangar space that's filled with Warbirds and things. So he's extremely fortunate to have it. But yeah, the speed is something that blew my mind as soon as we sort of released the brakes on the takeoff run, really. We were taking off from a grass strip, and I'm trying to remember the name of the pilot now. I'll kick myself for that. Spalding.
Oh, Mike.
That was it, yeah.
Mike Spalding, yeah.
Spalding. So he was there, and I was sort of in the, I don't know, what would be the navigator seat on the right-hand side, and Mike Spalding is on my shoulder there, because there's another thing that's unique about the Mosquito design. In order to keep the fuselage as narrow as possible, rather than pilots and navigators being sat directly side by side, the pilot would almost overlap the navigator a little bit, so his shoulder sort of came over mine. Anyway, he's right there, and he's doing sort of full and free final checks and immediate pre-takeoff checks before we release brakes and roll down the runway. And he held the stick back and everything. And you power up the engines, not full power, but pretty high RPM setting. Then you release the brakes. And because of its such light, powerful engines, but extremely lightweight design, the acceleration is that a jet. I've never experienced anything like it in a propeller aeroplane of any description before. And it just takes your breath away. It's mind-blowing, actually, how powerful it is. So you get a sense from immediately at the start of the flight of just how powerful this aircraft is and its performance. And then when you're flying through the atmosphere, it's just amazing, really. You can see landmarks moving past at breakneck speed, and we weren't even going at full speed. You know, we were just pottering around, really, for a bit of a pleasure flight. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's a powerful aircraft.
Wonderful. So I guess then you would have, if you were choosing an aircraft to go and fight in, that would be the one.
Yeah. Well, they built it, didn't they? You know, with no armament, simply on the sort of theory that it would just be able to out sprint anything that it came up against, and it certainly could during the sort of mid-war years, I guess. And yeah, definitely put that thing in a dive and hit 30 full power, and you'd be away in no time at all. And I would imagine, you know, Des will probably testify to this, but many aircrew owe their lives to that ability.
Yeah, later on we're going to talk with Des, and then obviously with Colin Bell, and Colin has a story of outrunning a ME-262 night fighter, which, yeah, exactly. That was a lot closer than running away from maybe an FW-190, but a lot of them would say the 190s had to have a height advantage, and they only got one chance with a pass, you know, because then the Mossie. So they had a height advantage, like on the Jericho raid, that's when you get the losses, as it were. But yeah, anyway, well, the guys will be able to, and the people listening will be able to look at that later. We went up with Mike, and you had this fantastic experience. You're a pilot yourself, you know, what inspired you to become a pilot?
Just say that again, sorry, John.
Yeah, what inspired you to become a pilot and to take up flying?
Yeah, so I always loved flying, as I've mentioned, you know, from my earliest years, and I put that down to sort of where I grew up, I suppose. Well, both my grandfathers were in the RAF, both engineers. One was a flight engineer, the other a ground engineer, and I grew up in an area of Worcestershire that was a low-level radar testing area, and so I had constant stream of aircraft types flying over the house, all different nations, Americans, Brits, Chinooks, Hercules, Jaguar, Tornado, whatever, loads of them. And so every time I would hear an aircraft outside, I'd sprint outside, go and have a look at it. And that kind of, I think that's probably where my love of flying really started from. And I didn't get into flying though until I came out of the forces. I did 5 years in the Marines, and then came out because of the accident that put me in a wheelchair. And it wasn't until I came out of there that I really sort of decided to take up flying as a you know, fully committed thing. And that was because of Douglas Bader. Many of the people watching today will know of Douglas Bader.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For those that don't know who Douglas Bader was, he was a Battle of Britain fighter ace on Hurricanes. But interestingly, he had no legs. He had his legs amputated because of a flying accident shortly before the war. And
that's right, yeah.
But this guy, and I thought, oh my God, yeah, think back to what he was capable of achieving back in the 1940s. He could fly the equivalent of a Eurofighter today, back then, with no legs. So if he could do it, you know, fly a Hurricane or a Spitfire back in 1940s with no legs, I'm sure that I might be able to stand half a chance of being able to fly something in the 20th century. So started pursuing those avenues, got in touch with Air Ability, who were the British Disabled Flying Association back then, and they were only more than pleased to give me a flight experience. I learned to fly through them, and the Civil Aviation Authority since, both engineering and medical, have been really open-minded, as we say, blue sky thinking. They've sort of always been of the attitude, prove that you can do it safely, and we have no reason to say no. So, you know, I've enjoyed just coming to the end of my instructor's rating now. I got night rating. And all sorts, yeah, and that's just because well, one, I'm passionate about it and I want to do it, but two, there are people as well that like to, you know, wish you well and help you along your way, which is great.
Fantastic. So the instructor's rating, you're going to be passing on your passion then.
And I can't wait to do it. So it's kind of doing my differences training with tailwheel aircraft as well. As we all know, the Mosquito is a tailwheel aeroplane, and I've got my little beautiful Piper Cub. That's tailwheel aeroplane, so I can do training on that and teach people to do tailwheel conversions as well. And I think my first victim will be my younger brother, who's only just recently qualified as a pilot. Else, but he's going to need probably about 500 hours of dual time with me before I let him loose in Echo Yankee, my Piper Cub.
Now, talking of that, I think now famous Piper Cub, I think it's right to say.
I hope so.
So you did a series of flying around Britain, which looked great fun. Was it good? Was it great to film? I mean, some amazing photography from your aircraft.
It was just brilliant. It was just, I mean, gosh, that's what I do on my weekends in the summer, you know. But then to be able to do this for a major broadcast like Channel 4 was just, you know, probably one of the, aside of course from the Mosquito film that I did, probably one of my best works. Yeah, and it was just like, I remember the production company came to me and were like, "Arthur, you've got an aeroplane. Why don't we do a story of Britain from the air, telling historical stories, but also, you know, just interesting stories that we can find in and around airfields and the local areas which surround them." And I thought, yeah, great. So we took the Cub, we flew from just place to place. We rigged the aeroplane up with 7 GoPro cameras. We had cameramen on the ground, and it was fantastic fun.
Good. And am I hearing that there's a second series in the offing?
No, not second series of that, though I'm constantly pitching to try to let them do it again. I've just done a 3 series for Channel 5 with Michael Burke, the newsreader, and that's about significant turning points of the Second World War. So the working title of it, which we used, was How Britain Won the War, and I don't know whether that will be the title that it goes to air with, but it basically tells all of the big stories that we're aware of. So sort of Dunkirk, the Enigma or the Battle for the Atlantic, El Alamein, but it tells them from a sort of different angle. So with Dunkirk, we focus on the siege of Calais and the troops that had to hold out there. For the Battle of the Atlantic, we all know about Enigma, but we tell the story of Colossus and the development of radar in Wellington bombers and then later Liberators, which meant we were able to turn the tide of the war against the U-boats in our favour. That hopefully will be out before Christmas, because I know that not very many people are making too much television at the moment, and there's lots of repeats on TV, which you've probably all noticed. So hopefully it will be out before Christmas. But once it does, I'll start banging the drum and letting you all know.
Fantastic. Good. Yeah, so you mentioned a few things there, Battle of Atlantic and obviously Bomber Command and stuff. So in those dark days around Dunkirk and stuff, the design of Mosquito started, you know. So, and in fact, some of you may know, but we have a drawing, and it's a bit of 4x2 timber from the Mossie, dated December the 26th, 1940. So certainly the dark days just after the Battle of Britain, the design was going on. And then later on, we'll listen to Des talk about how he took the Mark 18 Tetsi firing Mosquito with its 57mm Molins gun. And yeah, they took a U-boat down with that weapon as well. So the Battle of the Atlantic is there, you know. And I'm giving a few spoilers here, but one of the things was they received intel of where the sub would be. So that then relates back to your story on the Atlantic around Enigma and Colossus. You know, how we were decoding those signals.
Oh, it was so amazing. Yeah. I was lucky enough to interview Des during the 2013 Plane That Saved Britain Mosquito film that I made. So this is the first time, I think, that I've seen him since doing that. And I remember listening to him at the de Havilland Heritage Museum, just on the inside of the M25, and he was telling me about the Molin cannon and having a look at the comparison of the size of that shell to the size of I don't know, a standard cannon shell equipped to aircraft. And instantly, all these questions come to your mind about how does it work? How can you how can you fit a howitzer cannon to a wooden framed aeroplane? It would just shatter it in a million pieces. I won't go into any of the details, but it's fascinating to hear him tell the story of the gun in that aircraft. And I know that
exactly, and it just shows you what. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I know that the U-boats are absolutely terrified of anything coming from the air, because submarine obviously needs a bit of time to dive and submerge where it's safe, or dive where it's safe. But that's just, say, a Sunderland or a Liberator or whatever. But if you've got a flipping Mosquito with a massive cannon coming to it, it's going to be terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this is back to this versatility of the design. So, by war's end, it was photo recon, fighter bomber, night fighter, and then anti-ship, anti-submarine strike aircraft, as well, the odd ones painted as BOAC aeroplanes running. Well, apparently we're going on ball bearing missions, but I think their infantrymen used to carry a little spy in the bomb bay with a flask of coffee and a sandwich as well. Yeah, exactly. It's such a big story of the aircraft, and so you're right. I think the title of your documentary, the plane that saved Britain, I think is very, 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 apt. Yeah. So I think we're now, I think we're heading into questions from the audience. So, guys, what would you like to ask Arthur? If you post your question on the YouTube chat, I will scan down and if we see some great questions, I'll put them to Arthur. We've got 10 minutes to take questions, so let's have a look what comes through, Arthur, from the audience. There's 245 people on the chat.
John,
they've been a bit shy at the moment. Yeah, I'm still here. Roger Cosby's asking, what sort of view would you say the navigator got from that seat?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, actually, because that's it's a really good question, because that's one of the first things that I noticed. You remember how earlier I was describing the power of the aircraft, of the Mosquito, when we were sort of on the threshold of the runway, waiting to take off. The K-114, the example that I flew in, was the fighter variant. So you had a kind of you have this armoured screen in front of you, the cockpit glass, but it's unrestricted, so it's a beautiful view. There isn't any central division, unlike that of the bomber there. So you have this perfect view out front, and that's helped also by the fact that it's a twin-engine aircraft. Though it's a tail dragger, single-engine aircraft, you normally have a big Merlin or whatever it is up front, which impedes your view directly out the front of the aeroplane. But because this is a twin-engine tail dragger, obviously both of the engines are on the wings. So you, combined with that sort of beautiful windscreen in front of you, have an unimpeded view of the runway. Enemies or fire.
Are you back?
I think we lost my sound. Have you?
You did, but you're back now.
Great. Okay, where did I cut off? I'll start again from where we cut off.
You cut off on the impended view. You don't have the same impended view when you take off.
Right. So yeah, that's because of the fighter windscreen at the front. Obviously, unlike the bomber, it doesn't have a split down the middle, and because it's a tail dragger, normally with single-engine tail draggers, you have a stonking great Merlin or whatever it is out in front of you, which restricts your vision. Because this is a twin-engine aircraft, of course, both of the engines are on the wings. So that, combined with the fact that you've got this beautiful cockpit glass in front of you, you just have an unrestricted view of the runway, and it gives you a great perspective. And though the navigator is sat slightly further aft than the pilot, you still get a really amazing view out the front. And of course, you're in this big greenhouse. You've got this big canopy over the whole of you, and because it's a middle wing aeroplane, not low wing, not high wing, you've got great view all around you, 360, which gives you, I would imagine, for the guys back in the war days, ample chance to see any enemies that are coming at them from above. But yeah, no, it's good, great question. It's a great view.
An interesting question, a different one from Joe May in the United States, who's a great friend of the project. He says he wants to know what's the aroma like inside? What was the smell like? I know what he means with aeroplanes. Old aeroplanes to me just smell of oil and engineering. I don't know. This is a fairly new build. And did it have an aroma that stuck in your mind?
Well, probably because we were filming at the height of summer at Virginia Beach, where it's extremely hot. It was probably the aroma was coming from my armpits, probably more than anything else. But I don't know.
Okay.
You generally think of that typical Avro smell, don't you, of hydraulic oil and aviation fuel, leather, instruments and things that it's very unique, but I can't really remember that with a Mossie. I'm sure it was there, but it's not something that I can remember on the day, so I wouldn't be able to report on that, I'm afraid.
Fantastic. Another question is what was your feeling the first time you saw Mosquito in the flesh?
Oh, trying to remember the first time I saw a Mosquito in the flesh. It may have been Cosford, I think, when I was as a youngster, going to the museum with my dad or my uncle, and it would have been hanging from the ceiling there, and I thought, just looks exactly the same as the model. But seeing one on its undercarriage, standing on its own feet, was an entirely different experience, I remember. You kind of can't really get a sense of the scale and presence of the Mosquito when it's hanging from something, but when it's there on its undercarriage, it's quite different. It's quite a different beast. And I remember when they revealed the aeroplane at the Heritage Centre from behind the doors, and of course it sits tail low, so the nose of it and the bomber variant, which I don't know, I'm in two minds as to whether I prefer the bomber or the fighter variant. I think I do prefer the bomb, and it's got this kind of, bomb aimer's little oval on the perspex nose, and it just sort of sits there, and it just looks beautiful, and it has this real presence when it's on its own undercarriage, I think. So that's I remember that as being particularly memorable.
A question about the asymmetrical handling now. I mean, obviously you were sat on the right-hand seat. Did Mike, when he was taking off, have to fight? Mosquito's got a bit of an infamous reputation for a nasty bite. Never mind its firepower and its bombing power, but it kind of swing on takeoff. Did Mike give you a sense that he was fighting a swing, or did he find it pretty straightforward to manage?
Well, there wasn't too much evidence, but maybe that in itself is a clue in the fact that he didn't say very much at all during the takeoff and landing runs. So that might be, all the proof that we need that he was working extremely hard with the rudder pedals to make sure that the aircraft stayed under control. Because, the pilots that have flown it will be able to tell you much better than I, who you'll be speaking to and hearing from later on the show, will be able to tell you exactly what that's like. But such powerful engines on such a lightweight airframe, and it's a tail dragger, and the fact that the propellers are reasonably inefficient by comparison of what we're used to flying today, so they need to be bigger, which pushes the engines out even further. So the yaw controls, the yaw sort of forces in play with the Mosquito are enormous, I think.
And a question here is what are you looking forward to the most with our UK Mosquito?
We're just seeing one back in the UK skies, just sitting there with a cup of tea or a beer and a burger at an air show and just watching a Mosquito do its thing. There's no doubt about it. Just the way that the speed of it. I remember seeing it vaguely as a youngster, and just to see one back will be fantastic. Watching it taxi through, listening to the Merlin. One thing that I remember about my experience at Virginia Beach was this synchronized hum of two Merlins. So we're all very familiar with what a single engine Merlin powered aircraft that sounds like, whether it's the P-51, the Hurricane, the Spitfire, whatever. But when there's two of them, it's twice the pleasure, isn't it, really? And then when you synchronize the propellers, beautiful hum, hum, hum noise, it's special. It's spectacular.
A question about your Cub. They want to know if it's still airworthy. And I remember you were very hands-on, I think, with your lovely yellow cub in the last few years, haven't you?
Oh yeah, she's still airworthy. I've just sort of finished my instructor's course. I've been doing a lot of flying with it, trying to salvage as much of this despicable summer that we've had as possible. Obviously, due to coronavirus, I haven't been able to do as much flying because of the restrictions on general aviation earlier in the year, and then we had a very wet winter last winter as well. So that meant that flying wasn't happening very much. But no, she's still airworthy, very much so. Last year I had to do a wing rebuild on the left-hand wing, but that's one of the joys of the Piper Cub, is that you can do these things yourself. It's such a simple aeroplane. It's a wooden spar. There are ribs that hang off it. It's covered in fabric. You iron the fabric, you paint it, you bolt it back on. It's almost as simple as that. And that was one of the big selling points for me for having a Piper Cub, is that you can do all of the work yourself. And I love doing all the work myself. Of course, it's signed by your inspector. But
Of
yeah,
course, yeah.
it's airworthy at the moment. But as with all of these
Fantastic.
old airplanes,
Well, we know where to turn to for some good labour then down at Retrotec then on the next wing.
yeah, no doubt.
Good. And the last question is, would you be interested in making a documentary with a TV company about our Mosquito?
Yeah, 100%. Of course.
Absolutely. We're going to try. We are
Yeah.
going to try. When we get more progress, guys, from donations, I can tell you we get probably 3-4 documentary companies a year inquiring. As we make more progress, we're gonna be able to start doing those types of things. So yeah, please keep giving and helping us out and spread awareness, please, everybody. So thank you, Arthur. We're coming to the end of our segment with yourself this afternoon, and again, thank you for being aboard as our patron and help spread the word, and thank you for your valuable time this afternoon in support of our project.
No problem. No, it's a pleasure to be a part of it, John, and it's great to be a part of it at this early stage as well. For everybody that's watching, that's thinking of donating, it really is a magical time to be a part of the charity, because we've got the moulds coming. This is no longer a sort of whimsical idea in somebody's head. This is really something that's happening, and for everybody that's watching it today, you can go onto the website, follow the progress, and you're going to see this aeroplane turn from Sitka spruce into a flying aircraft, and not just a flying aircraft, but one of the world's most beautiful and elegant flying airplanes and powerful flying airplanes ever to grace the skies. So yeah, get donating. Thanks for your time, John, and I look forward to speaking to you and seeing you all again.
Thank you very much, Arthur. Appreciate it. Okay, folks, we're going to take a short comfort break for 10-15 minutes, and we're just going to put a slide up to show you, and then we'll be having a fantastic interview and chat with Des Curtis. Okay, so go and grab a cup of tea or that comfort break, and we'll be back on air shortly. I'm still live. Okay. Oh, yes, you are. Is it still doing it? Nice one. Bill said he could hear me at 14:48. Oh well. Yeah, I'm getting feedback now as well from my questions. My voice rather. Yeah. Yeah, so that.
Hello,
Hello, Des.
Hello there, John. How are you doing?
Well, good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you.
Well, we have a truly great guest for you this afternoon. Flight Lieutenant Des Curti, DFC. And Des, how are you anyway?
I'm pretty well, yes. Thoroughly enjoyed
Fantastic.
listening to Arthur there.
Good.
Can I talk about him for a moment?
You may indeed. Go ahead.
Just to say, when we were making that film, The Plane That Saved Britain, we went to the De Havilland Museum on a very cold morning. I parked alongside a car, out of which came Arthur. And my conversation went like this. Arthur, how did you enjoy America? Doesn't matter about America, he said. I've had the greatest thrill in my life. What was that? I have flown a Mosquito. And if you'd given him £1 million, he couldn't have been happier than that. So pleased to hear that he's now a patron of our efforts here. But there we are.
Well, that's the first question then. His enjoyment of Mosquito, is that reflected in your experience?
In my experience, flying in a Mosquito was a wonderful experience. It really was a wonderful experience. And the contrast between that and the Beaufighter from which I came was the difference between driving a Lada and a Bentley.
What year did you join up, Arthur? Oh, sorry, Des.
Say again?
What year did you join the Royal Air Force?
May 1941, when I was 17.
Wow. And why the RAF?
Well, my father was a lifetime Irish Guardsman, and I heard from him vivid descriptions of hell on earth during the First World War. That didn't appeal to me. I had no interest in being a sailor, no interest in the sea whatsoever. The RAF had offered some excitement, as well as a base from which you could return and sleep in comfort. A very good reason.
What aircraft did you train on?
A succession of things, started with a Proctor when I was doing wireless operator training. Then we went on to Anson's for navigation, and then the Blackburn Botha, about which people know very little, when I did the General Reconnaissance course, then Beaufighters, and then on to a Beaufighter squadron. My training was about the longest in the RAF, 19 months of continuous training, because we had to be trained as wireless operators, air gunners, navigators, and then the special training for low-level flying over the sea out of sight of land without too many, nowadays, technical aids.
And what was the first Mosquito squadron you served in?
618. The newly formed 618 that formed the same day as the renowned 617 squadron. And we thought, when we were sent to Marham to convert, we thought we were going back to the similar job that we would be doing on coastal aircraft with the Beaufighter squadron. It turned out to be a very different story from that one, however, as we've come round to in a moment.
Yes, absolutely a different story.
Yeah.
Was it all very cloak and dagger?
Extremely so. We were moved up to a place called Skitton, which is as near to the northern coast of Scotland as you could get, totally out in the wilds. no other aircraft there. When we arrived, we were surrounded by a whole squad of corporal military policemen, RAF police, headed by a DAPM. And the first task was to spell out to us the degree of secrecy with which we were to be surrounded for many months to come. Isolation, in other words. No talking about the project anywhere except the operations room, not in the mess, not in any correspondence. And you would sit there in this fairly desolate airfield, having a drink at night. You weren't allowed to talk about what the target was or what the operation was all about.
What were your thoughts when you heard about what the weapon was?
Well, we were very intrigued because we couldn't visualize how you could put a big ball, as we thought of it, into the fairly narrow fuselage of a Mosquito. Then when we heard that there were going to be two of them sitting in tandem, we were very intrigued to watch when the first aircraft was delivered to us several weeks later.
So for everyone's benefit on the call, 618 Squadron was formed, likely along with the famous Dam Buster Squadron, to drop Barnes Wallace's famous bouncing bomb. And the highball bomb was the smaller of the two weapons. And in fact, it was going to be the first weapon to be used, but against ships. So Des, what target did they say you were going to go for?
Always the Tirpitz, the German battleship Tirpitz, which, when this idea was first mooted, was then based at Trondheim in Norway, which was within easy reach of a flight out from Sunborough in the Shetlands. So the distance from the target was not a problem, but the Tirpitz then moved to a new base up in Altenfjord, way up in the north of the Arctic Circle, which was just within the range on a one-way trip of a Mosquito with drop tanks, leaving a big problem.
You couldn't get back, or couldn't
we
get
couldn't
there.
get back. Yeah. How do we get back?
Did they have a plan for that?
And you see, with nothing else to do, because we were in such a remote place, the navigator spent hours in the little ops block working out the routes, the distances, and we all came back to the same question: what happens after the attack? If we can solve that, then we can start thinking about the attack proper. But let's get the return sorted out before we go any further. And no one could produce an answer that was even acceptable to us, but we just had to listen and pretend we understood.
Wow. So potentially the mission was on, but it was a one-way trip.
Yep. Yes. It was never so described, but it doesn't need too many brains to realize if you've got a target that's 920 miles away and you've got an 1,100-mile endurance, you weren't going to get too far back before you fell into the sea. And the Arctic Circle was a very hostile, unwelcoming stretch of water. So then we come to the ideas that were put forward to us as ways in which we could possibly return from the Tirpitz.
And was there any particular favourite?
Which way would you like to die?
Oh dear.
One idea was that we would fly back out to sea, and an aircraft carrier, or a Royal Navy aircraft carrier, would be in the vicinity, and we would each jump out of the aircraft into the sea, and the Admiral's launch would then be sent out to pick us up. The only problems with that was the Royal Navy didn't fancy one of their aircraft carriers with engines stopped in the sea, which was infested with German U-boats, just to pick up a few survivors from the Royal Air Force. We were expendable, but the aircraft carrier was certainly not. So we forgot that idea. Another idea was to fly back to Narvik, from where they ran a train regularly cross-country down to Boden in Sweden. The train ran once a week from Narvik, right through a highly forested area, and we would fly down the railway line until we ran out of fuel, where we would then crash land on the pine trees and hope to flag down the train when it was coming down on its way to Sweden, where we would be taken in as prisoners of war until eventually be returned to England sometime later on in the war. To go to Russia, fly back to Russia, and they said, well, you might then be regarded as a prisoner of war, although Russia was ostensibly fighting the Germans alongside us. None of these ideas appealed to a 19-year-old, and you just had to listen and say, well, that's the way it's going to be.
Well, thankfully you're here. So it sounded like the mission never went ahead.
The more one thinks about the mission, the less scope it had for ever succeeding. There was so many reasons why it should not succeed, not least because the weapon, the bouncing bomb, didn't perform satisfactorily in seas that were disturbed by short waves, unlike the dams where the water's calm. We had that problem, and a host of others. We never, for example, flew a squadron in formation. We never had a full complement of aircraft. So we never attempted to do a dummy run on a Scottish lock. The whole thing was done as we progressed day by day on one or two aircraft at a time, as and when they became available. So that went on from the end of March until September, when they disbanded 618 Squadron for the time being, and my pilot and I were posted away with great relief, I have to say.
Can you tell me about the training of dropping the bomb, the bouncing bomb? How did you aim it, or knew when to release the weapon?
Well, we didn't have a target, a bomb site as such. No bomb site fitted. That had not been developed. So we would fly at 60 feet, and then 60 feet straight and level, with no rudder on, flying towards the battleship that was moored in Loch Striven as our training target. Fly straight and level, and then release one of the stores, as we call them. 3 seconds later, release the second. We needed to have that separation so that the stores didn't collide when they left the aircraft and made their first bounce on the lock water. We watched them, it progressed to the target, so that was all of our weaponry gone in one go. And the main task then was to clear away from the battleship and get ourselves out of the lock in one piece. But of course, the turbulence that you created could cause that skimming effect to cause the bouncing bomb to steer off in one direction or another. Illustrated because the RAF gave the Americans 2 bombs to try out, and they fitted them onto a Maryland in America and dropped them at very low level. And unfortunately, one of them bounced and took the tail off the Maryland. And that was the one and only venture that the US Air Force made into using the bouncing bomb. So, all around, it spelt disaster with no guarantee. If you could work out how you could get 20 aircraft into a narrow lock in Norway, flying in line abreast in some form or other against a target that's 800 feet wide, so that the aircraft that were following the second or third formations would be enjoying all the turbulence, the explosions, and the anti-aircraft fire. The chances of ever getting through were absolutely zero. It's as simple as that.
Slim. Very slim. Now, everybody on the chat is getting excited about the munitions on the table behind you. Can you tell us what they are?
Yes, the tall one is a cardboard replica of a 57mm gun, and the little chap beside it, in black, is the ammunition of a Spitfire, 20mm Spitfire cannon shell. So we have a 57mm one that was fitted onto our Mark 18 Tetsis, 24 shells at a time, slightly larger, shall we say, than the little tiller of the Spitfire.
Well, that comes on to our next
so we've moved down to Cornwall now. You've taken me down to Cornwall.
Cornwall, yeah. Well, after you were disbanded for a while, how long was it before you went down to Cornwall?
Well, my pilot and I left Skitton, and we were told that we were going to go to RAF Benson. So we flew down to Benson to be told that we were going to pick up a PRU aircraft and do a line-over-light flight down the Italian coast into Egypt, where we would leave the aircraft and work our way back to England. So we saw this beautiful, highly polished aircraft, and we took it up to 32,000 feet, which for us was really something, because we'd never been above 5,000 feet. And we took 4 days leave and had all our injections. When we went back to Benson, they said, "What are you doing here? You should be at RAF Pradanach." "Where is Pradanach?" And we said, "Well, that's down in Cornwall." So we got a lift down to RAF Pradanach, and there we met our Mark 18 Tetsis. So we went to Boscombe down to pick them up and bring them down, 3 of them. And there I stayed with the Tetsi aircraft until I finished with the squadron flying in January 1945.
Wow. And can you describe the operations you were doing from Prendy?
With the Tetsi Mosquitoes, our job then was to intercept German U-boats as they came into or were leaving the ports like Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, Bordeaux, the German U-boat pens. The Bay of Biscay, within 30 miles or so from the coast, is very shallow, sandy bottom. So the U-boats could not surface while they transited that 30 miles. The Royal Navy picked up some intelligence about U-boats arriving, and they had to pass through mineswept channels because the RAF and the US Air Force, when they could spare them from Bomber Command, for example, they dropped mines, magnetic mines, all the way along the French Atlantic coast. The Germans then kept open about 8 mine-swept channels. We knew the exact location of these channels. We also heard from the Royal Navy which of the channels the U-boats would be using. For example, they came off the Atlantic Patrol and headed in the case of one particular one, into Saint-Nazaire. That was known as Channel C. Our instruction was merely to be at point C, which was the seaward end of that channel, at a time to the minute, like 07:43. And there we would fly down the channel down to the U-boat pen, hoping to see the U-boat while we were flying through its safe channel. And that was the routine that we followed.
And how many U-boats did you see?
Not many, but what we did see, we did a tremendous lot of damage to them because, for instance, on March the 25th, we went down through this Channel C to Saint-Nazaire. There were 2 of us, and we had 4 Mark 6 fighter escorts from 248 Squadron with us, because the Germans sent out armed minesweepers and the odd destroyer to accompany the U-boats on their last run into harbour. On that morning, we went out, and sure enough, we'd gone most of the way through the channel, and suddenly we saw these ships on the horizon. We were then down to about 40 feet off the sea. So by arrangement, we climbed up, the 2 of us, with myself and pilot and I leading. The 2 of us climbed up into the sun. The fighter aircraft then attacked the minesweepers and the destroyers, while we concentrated our fire on the U-boat, which turned out to be U-976. How we attacked it was, we went up into the sun to about 1,500 feet, turned round then and commenced a dive at 30-degree angle, and we used the aircraft as a target arrangement. We pointed the aircraft at the target rather than using a gun sight. And as we then accelerated from our normal cruising of about 260 miles an hour to nearly 400 in that dive, we would manage to get off as many as 5 single shots at the U-boat. On that occasion, we did in fact fire 5 shots, but we didn't aim at the U-boat itself.
Oh.
The reason being that when we were using solid shell as our ammunition, and when that shell hit the water resistance caused the shell to change its direction, and it traveled parallel to the surface of the water. So we aimed short of the U-boat so that the shell would then penetrate the ballast tanks on the outside of the U-boat and then penetrate the hull. With solid steel, it would cut through anything. And because of the impetus of the shell, it would then ricochet within the U-boat and hopefully ricochet itself out of the U-boat hull, making 2 holes for the price of 1. And on the 25th of March, that particular attack, the U-boat that we attacked, it foundered within 20 minutes. Fortunately, 47 of the 51 crew were rescued alive, but 4 of them were mortally wounded. So that was the best of the successes that we had. 2 days later, we were in almost identical position, but this time we encountered 2 U-boats, destroyer, minesweepers, and Ju-88s providing air cover, and our 2 Mark 18 Tetsis. We attacked U-960, put it out of action, so it had to return to Saint-Nazaire. It never made its voyage that time. It was out of action then for many, many months until it was eventually destroyed in the Mediterranean. So we had the 2 successes on those within 3 days of each other. Then we had to wait for the next target to offer itself. That was the pattern of flying.
Quite a lot of questions coming through on the chat.
Yes, sir.
What does it feel like inside the aircraft when that 57 mil is kicking?
It felt like being shafted. Because that is the simplest description. As Arthur was explaining, the 2 of us sitting side by side, we were on the armor-plated sheet steel sitting, and I had an armor-plated backrest. And immediately behind my back was the top of the breech, where there was a V-shaped cartridge holder which rocked as each shell came down and was pumped into, by hydraulic pressure, pumped into the breech of this big gun. So there was the enormous bang when the shell was fired, and we, on one occasion, filmed it, and we found out that the flame from the shell was 130 feet ahead of us of an instant. We flew through the fire of the explosion as the shell left us. The spent cartridge was then dropped into a steel box because it couldn't drop out of the aircraft in case it hit the tail and did some damage. And then we had another shock as the second round, or the next round, was then pushed into the breech, and the breech block closed. So we enjoyed some fairly noisy clattering and banging. There was one instance, however, going on, we were coming back from Bordeaux, and we ran into nightfall. So rather than go all the way around the Brest Peninsula, the 2 of us, we were on our own by then, the 2 of us decided to take a shortcut across the land at Brest and to come out on the north side near Cherbourg, and then straight across to Cornwall. So we did that. We didn't have any nav lights on, and in the dark we suddenly saw the nav lights of an aircraft, obviously preparing to go into land at an airfield. So Doug, my pilot, decided to have a bit of fun with that, and we decided to become a night fighter. So we came as close up to this aircraft, we couldn't see it, we'd only see the nav lights, as we dared, and Doug fired a round at this German aircraft. We didn't realize, of course, that the blinding light would blind us completely. About a minute and a half. All the aircraft, the German aircraft, put its lights out and disappeared somewhere. Where it was, we don't know, because by the time we regained our sight, we traveled another 5 or 10 miles away.
Well, if you'd have hit him, you'd have got a big surprise.
We would have had, and I think we would have been in trouble with the RAF for having crossed land, because we were only supposed to attack marine targets. But we were fairly busy, and then once the Germans realized that we had this 57mm artillery gun, it was no longer secret. We then turned our attention to surface vessels as well. So we would attack whatever German targets above sea or below sea, whatever they presented, right down as far as Bordeaux. We then, when the war in France had moved away, the Germans had moved away from there, we in turn went back to Scotland, and we resumed work then chasing the U-boats and shipping along the Norwegian coast, where we had some remarkable success. We only had in total 13 Mosquitoes were modified with the Molin's gun. Only 11 of them came into operational service. We lost nearly half of them. But I would think we probably accounted for 5 U-boats, plus a lot of surface shipping in the time that we operated. So it's a good result for a small crew. We only operated normally 2 at a time.
And did you always hunt in a pack with other FP6s?
Yeah, yes, because the enemy opposition was sometimes quite formidable. There was an occasion on, I think it was April the 10th, we were further down off La Rochelle, and we came across a U-boat with a destroyer almost alongside it, but they were both moving, and some minesweepers and about 6 Ju-88 circling above them. And we had a ding-dong battle there because we were concentrating our fire on the U-boat. We'd lost the first CO on the very first flight that we made. Sadly, he was shot down into the Bay of Biscay. And Tony Phillips took over as the flight commander. We were flying as his number 2, and we came up from one attack, climbing back up again, and he suddenly came up behind a Ju-88 and with remarkable accuracy fired one of the 57mm shells, which took an engine, port engine, out of the Ju-88. It was remarkable to watch that engine leave its mountings. The Ju-88 fell into the sea, of course, destroyed. That was a rather unusual activity. So,
an air-to-air kill with the 57mm.
Yes, yeah.
Goodness.
So, it was an exciting aircraft to fly in. I mean, the Mosquito itself, it was a beautiful airplane. There's no doubt about that. It was comfortable, warm. It had very few vices. Arthur was talking earlier about his tendency to swing to starboard on takeoff. But when you fitted contra-rotating props, that problem disappeared. And it would stand a tremendous amount of punishing, that wooden frame. For example, that 57mm gun, which weighed 1,200 kilograms, it was a massive big gun, was mounted on the main spar with 5 bolts. Now, we fired 24 rounds, or we carried 24 rounds, and sometimes we fired all 24. We never had any instance where those bolts became loose, were shaken loose from the main spar. So they were bolted onto woodwork, but the strength of the aircraft never suffered from all that punishment of torque and strain that we imposed with that gun. And that also says a lot for the quality of the Mosquito.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
5 main bolts.
Yeah.
Gosh.
We took 2, we started with 4 machine guns, 4 Brownings, and we took 2 of them out because we couldn't use them. There's no real purpose. So by taking 2 out, we reduced the weight. Therefore, we increased our speed by a couple of knots. And of course, we had no, there was a G radar facility that was available for the bombers flying into Europe, the 3G being 3 aerials. But of course, they were in line and we were an extension of the line. So we couldn't pick up the G signals. And we were then reliant entirely on the old-fashioned idea, pencil, ruler, divider, compass, and what was jokingly called a Dalton computer, which was a little handheld device to give you a triangle of velocities. And we had a drift indicator, which I could push out through the door of an aperture in the door, but that's to measure the wind speed and drift. That was a very useful piece of navigation equipment.
Fantastic. Guys, we've got just 10 minutes left with the. So if you want to start putting your questions on the chat, I'll look out for them. While the questions are coming in, Des, there was rather a happy ending to one of your U-boat kills. Do you want to quickly tell us about that?
A happy ending of that brought me in touch with the commandant of U-976, the one that we sank on the 25th of March. Ended with he coming to stay with his family, with us. I was living in Wimborne in Dorset. He and 3 of the officers attended to the Haviland Museum. They were invited by Sir Ivor Broome, and that was when I donated the proceeds of my first edition of my book to the museum, and gave it to the VRAF Benevolent Fund. I mean, Raymond Teasler, the commandant, was a lovely character, and our relationship could be typified because sitting having a beer in the Comet pub in Hatfield, he quietly said to me one day, "Why did I have to wait so long to find a younger brother?"
Oh.
These 2 people who had set out originally to kill each other.
Yeah.
That was the story in brief. Yeah.
Just shows you, doesn't it? Yeah.
The futility of war. Yes. Yeah.
He had a job to do. You had to do.
Yeah. He was 24 years old. He was slightly older than me. 24 years old as a U-boat captain.
Still a very young age.
Yeah.
Yeah. A question coming in is, when you fired the Molins, how much speed did it take off?
It was alleged that the aircraft came in a microsecond, came to a standstill. And the wing commander actually flew one out of Banff, and he quite deliberately fired with the intention of checking on that story. And he said the instruments actually almost came to zero and up again, but we weren't aware of it because it was so instantaneous. It showed if you were in a formation and you fired all 24 rounds, then you were further back in the formation by the time you'd fired the last one. So there was a slight hesitation in your flying.
Okay. Another question. How far or long did you fly at 40 feet above the sea?
Well, and when we were working in the bay, we would do that whole 30 miles at that level. But we'd come down, say, past Isle of Ushant, we'd be down there maybe at 200 feet, comfortable flying. And then as we came near to the Mineswept Channel, then we would come down, make sure we were well below the radar range and as close to the sea as we dared, because we were leading the formation, so we were usually the lowest aircraft of a formation of 6 aircraft.
In all weathers?
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Was there a time when the weather would scrub a mission?
I don't recall. Well, there were times when it was totally impossible to fly, but they were mostly when we were in Norway, because we were talking, most of us, what we're talking about now occurred during the summer, spring, summer and autumn.
Fantastic. Okay, guys, any other questions? Questions for Des? I think you'd all agree it's been a fascinating story. And Des, you lived a life.
Yeah. One of the things that we did just before D-Day, two of us were sent out to find a landing craft tanks that had been abandoned in the Bay of Biscay. I don't know why it was there, but they didn't want it to drift onto the French coast. So two of us went out on a rather grey, miserable afternoon to find this landing craft tanks and to put enough holes in it to ensure that it sank before it could be captured by the Germans, which we did. We did a square search and found it and pummeled it with holes and then came back again.
Came back again.
Yeah. Little variety in our lives.
What would it feel like for you to see a UK Mosquito flying?
I'd go a long way to see that. Not just to see it, but to hear it. I have to say, when 299 crashed, we were at the Mosquito Museum at London Colney, and it was to come down and do a fly past. And the news came through to say that it had crashed. I have to confess, I cried at the thought that we'd lost the last aircraft, because we really were attached to that beautiful airplane. And you get it finished, and if I'm still around, you can
you're
carry
going to
me
be my
there.
navigator.
Yes.
Anybody who can pencil and ruler across the Bay of Biscay, yeah, you're in.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh,
One last question,
Yes, sir.
and it's a great question to ask. It's come from John. Best memory of your flying career?
The best memory, not the worst, the best. I suppose it probably was after that first attack, when we attacked U-976, that because I say we lost our CO, Squadron Leader Rose, on the very first trip that the two of us did. And this was then the first chance we had as a crew to prove our worth with that gun. And I must say, when we returned there, we were pretty high and exhilarated. Yeah. Perfect excuse to have another 5 pints.
And fight another day.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Des, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you very much for your valuable time.
It's a great pleasure. And, we wish you all a success. I will support you, as you know, as much as I'm able to, because all of us want to see that aircraft in the air and listen to that sound of the beautiful sound of the Merlins coming at us. Yes. Keep it up.
There's
Keep up
nothing
the
else
good
to
work.
add to that. We'll keep it up. Don't
Okay,
worry.
John. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Des. Okay, everyone. Don't go away. We're going to be on with Wing Commander Bill Ram in about a minute or two. We're just going to switch over to presentations. But I hope you all enjoyed listening to this. What a fantastic character.
Good afternoon, everybody. I trust you can hear me all right. First of all, thanks to Des. What a fantastic story. Difficult to follow that, I guess. But just by way of a light change, here is nothing at all to do with the Mosquito. It's my story as a display pilot and a display supervisor. However, I'd just like you to remember that before any of this started, I had 26 years of regular pilot service in the Royal Air Force, dreaming, as most military pilots do, of one day maybe somebody would ask you to do some display flying. For me, that came in a telephone call at about this time of year in 1998, when I took a phone call from Squad Leader David Thomas, who some of you will know is as famous Vulcan and Lancaster display pilot. And Dave was asking me if I'd be interested in coming to fly the Lancaster in Dakota on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight, with a view to taking over from him as the bomber leader at the end of the 1999 display season. As you can imagine, it didn't take me long to say yes to that idea, so pretty quickly I found myself first of all converting to the Dakota, and subsequently the Lancaster. Everything was going swimmingly well. My world was pretty much perfect until at the Southend display, which is the end of May in that year, about halfway through the display, we had a voice from the rear turret saying, "I can smell smoke and fumes." And as I looked out of the co-pilot's window on the right-hand side, I noticed to my horror that the number 3 engine was on fire. What had actually happened was the supercharger had blown itself up, causing fire in that engine. We struggled back to Southend, and eventually the aeroplane was recovered back to Coningsby. But as you can see in this photograph at the time, apart from the fact I have a very strange taste in shirts, the number 3 engine was removed, and in fact, the Lancaster didn't fly much for the rest of that season, which was a shame from my point of view. I continued to fly the Dakota for the next couple of months when, to my horror, the RAF personnel department rang me up and said they were going to promote me and send me to Saudi Arabia for the next 2 years. So barely had my budding display flying career got started, then it was all finished. Off I went to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh, when 18 months later the same phone rang again, and I was invited to become Wing Commander Royal Air Force Aerobatic Team, Wing Commander Red Arrows. Again, it took me about one heartbeat to decide this was a really good idea. And so I accepted that. And at the beginning of 2001, I found myself back flying the Hawk from RF Scampton. We're just starting with this slide because one of the questions that people usually ask me is, when the red arrows look like they're really close, it's all smoke and mirrors, isn't it? And to be honest, there is a little bit of that. However, this is not smoke and mirrors. This is the synchro pair crossing each other at a combined speed of about 800 knots. And I'll leave you to judge for yourselves whether or not that's close or not. Next slide, please, John. My principal job as Wing Commander Red Arrows was, as the team's senior supervisor, was to ensure that everything that the team did was as safe as it possibly could be. And actually, the team would have most of the fun, and if anything went badly wrong, then I'd be the one who picked up the pieces. But there was lots of fun along the way. So I occasionally got to fly the odd VIP. You go back a slide, please, John. I'll ask you when to move on. The gentleman in the middle there is Geoffrey Hoon, MP, who at the time was the Secretary of State for Defence, who was actually a bit of a local lad. So we've got to fly some interesting people. Next slide, please, John. It wasn't all good times, of course. On this occasion, with my ham-footedness, I suppose you'd call it, I'd used the brakes a bit too much in a hot place and caused the tyre to break, which, of course, is a very embarrassing place to find yourself. Next slide, please, John. As I say, my key role was to supervise the safety of the team, and to do that, I was required to fly in the back seat with each and every member of the team, just to satisfy myself that what they were doing was correct. So I got to get to see some fairly interesting sights like this one. Next slide, please, John. We also, of course, lots of people wanted to have their photograph taken with the red arrows. So part of my job was I would fly some pretty famous photographers who would get images like this. This was taken in 2002. I think it was the rehearsal for the Queen's Jubilee fly past. And I'm sure the second type of aeroplane in the picture requires absolutely no introduction from me, but a fantastic day out. Next slide, please, John. There you go. I noticed on the earlier feed there's a lot of our American friends watching, so here's one for you. This was at the Royal International Air Tattoo. The USAF very kindly sent across this very shiny F117, which did fly past with the team, and subsequently we went and took some photographs. I didn't dare show anybody this photograph for about 10 years after the picture was taken, because I think we'd have all ended up sent for trial in America. But the interesting thing about this picture is that the pilot flying it is not a USAF pilot, it's an RF pilot, and actually an ex-Red Arrow, a chap called Richie Matthews, who was at the time doing an exchange tour on 117. So great times. Next slide, please, John. Again, it's interesting. I think we're going to hear about crossing the Atlantic in a Wanner, in a Mosquito, using the big overload tank. This is how the Red Arrows get across the Atlantic. This is how we got across the Atlantic in 2002 in particular. Bear in mind, if you were going to do this to go to Toronto in your Boeing 747 as was, or big airline, you'd go to Heathrow, have a gin and tonic, and 8, 9, 10 hours later you'd arrive in Toronto. Not so the Red Arrows. For us, it was a 3-day journey. Stopping at Lossiemouth in Scotland on the way out to put on our big rubber immersion suits and have some lunch before flying to Iceland, where we spent the night, and then onwards to Sonderstrom on the west coast of Greenland, and then to the place which is near the Northwest Passages, is Baffin Island, a place called Frobisher Bay, Iqaluit, depending on what you want to call it. And then onwards, we spent a night there, and then onwards to Goose Bay, a night in Goose Bay, and then lunch in Quebec, and then finally arrived in Toronto. This was done towards the end of August, so the best possible time of year to do it. We took 11 Hawks in one big formation, supported by a C-130 Hercules with all our ground crew and all the engineering equipment, and the comforting presence of a large Nimrod search and rescue aircraft. For those of you who are looking for that getaway destination this year or perhaps next year, I can thoroughly recommend Sonderstrom or Frobisher Bay as somewhere where you will definitely have got away from it all. Just to talk a little bit, the return journey, we came back only a couple of weeks later, but on the leg from Frobisher Bay to Sonderstrom, it was quite interesting. Usually when the Red Arrows are transiting at high level, there's a chat frequency, and we used to do things like have a quiz. On this occasion, I noticed everybody had fallen completely silent. And when I looked down at the sea, I noticed that actually the sea wasn't moving, which was a bit of a puzzler until eventually somebody worked out that the sea wasn't moving because it had in fact frozen. This, of course, completely focuses your mind on what happens if you eject, and the ice is just thick enough for you to splash through the ice and get stuck underneath it. So it was quite a relief for us to eventually get back to the UK a couple of days later, when we continued, and this kind of shows the flexibility of the Red Arrows, we continued straight down to the Channel Islands for the Jersey and Guernsey air shows. Next slide, please, John. I did 4 years as Wing Commander Red Arrows, and a very fine 4 years it was too, but of course all good things come to an end. 2 years later, I finished my regular RF service and then rejoined as a full-time reservist flying instructor on the Grog Tutor. And that was in 2008. And towards the end of that year, the question went round, would anybody like to volunteer to be the tutor display pilot for the 2009 season? I was pretty sure that as a 56-year-old full-time reservist that nobody was going to let me do that. But to my surprise, they allowed me to be in the competition, at which point I realised that actually I was going to have to win that competition, which in the end I did. And I ended up displaying the Tutor for the next 2 display seasons. The Tutor perhaps is not the most sexy of display airplanes, but of the airplanes which I have displayed, I have to tell you this was the hardest to complete a display in, for several reasons. One is it's a very, very good elementary trainer, but as a display airplane, it was chronically underpowered. 185 horsepower Lycoming engine. Well, actually, it was the only time in my life that I had more power in my car than I had in my airplane, which made it a real struggle to keep the energy going, to keep the airspeed up high enough to be able to complete a 6-minute display. Because every time you overcooked a loop or a roll, it would knock off half a knot or a knot from the airspeed, which over the course of, I think there were 21 maneuvers, meant that if you didn't do it right, by the time you were about halfway through the process, then you simply couldn't carry on with the display. Also, as you can see, the airplane's made by a company called Grob. They're well known for making gliders, so they can't help it. The Grob Tutor's got very long wings, which meant that actually it had a pretty slow roll rate, which we made up for in those days by being able to do flick rolls in the airplane, which is sadly no longer permitted. But it was good fun. For those who know Lincolnshire, that's somewhere down towards Spalding in the background. Next slide, please, John. It was, however, a fantastic way of display flying, completely different to what I was used to with the Red Arrows or with BBMF, because with the Tutor, we always landed either at the display airfield or at the airfield from which the displays would be mounted, and mixed with all the other light aircraft and light aircraft display crews, so the Warbirds, the John Romains, the Peter Teichmans, and of course the famous wing walkers. So we'd hang out together, socialise together, and stay in the same hotels, which made it a very sociable 2 years. The other spin-off, as you can see, is that I never had to worry where my next meal was coming from. As I say, I did that for 2 years, which totaled about 120 displays, I think. But in the end, next slide, please, John. All good things come to an end. This was at Shoreham, and I think you can see perhaps just a tinge of sadness on that little face. I finished, my last year was 2010, and beginning of 2011, I found myself at lunch for one of my friends, when another friend, who was the operations director for the Vulcan to the Sky Trust, a chap called Mike Pollitt, asked me if I was going to display the Tutor again that year, and I said, no, I don't think so. So he said, why don't you come and fly the Vulcan? To be honest, I thought he'd had several beers too many, and he didn't really mean it. But again, to my surprise, shortly afterwards, I had a phone call from Martin Withers, the chief pilot, who most people will know as the captain of Black Buck 1, saying, yeah, no, we meant it. Do you want to come and fly the Vulcan? Which caused a bit of a scramble for me, because I'd had a private pilot's license when I was 17, but it had been lapsed for the next 40 odd years. So I had to renew my private pilot's license, which might be a surprise to you, because the base license that all of us flew the Vulcan on was a single engine piston private pilot's license, which seems a bit crazy, really. So I think it was about May or June of 2011, I found myself back in a Vulcan for the first time in 36 years. Next slide, please, John. So there you go. For those who don't know what the inside of a Vulcan looks like, that's it. You heard Arthur and Des talking about how cozy it is inside a Mosquito. I think we probably had slightly more room in the Vulcan, but not necessarily that much. Just a quick tour of the inside there. Everything on the dashboard is pretty much original. Everything that's in black and white or yellow is original. The stuff that you can see in green or blues and browns were additions that were put into 558. So there were a couple of very cheap and nasty AIs, 2 quite useful electronic HSIs, and in front of me there at the top of the dashboard, a Garmin GPS, which was very, very unfriendly, but it was there because it enabled us to save a little bit of weight by removing the two navigators from the rear crew. Again, for those of you who might be interested, if you look behind Kevin's left elbow there, the thing you can see with all the switches on it is called the fuel tray. If you look very carefully, you can kind of make out the shape of a Vulcan in those switches. And each one of those 14 switches in the middle represents one of the fuel tanks within the Vulcan. All of which, any one of which could feed any one of the four engines. But if you look at the back of the fuel tray there, you can see the three white lines in the square magnetic indicators. They're called crossfeed cocks, which you could open and close. So by moving them all so that those lines are across the aeroplane, you could feed the right-hand number 4 engine all the way from the number 7 tank at the left-hand extremity. So a very flexible, very clever fuel system. Next slide, please, John. A bit like with the red arrows, lots and lots of people wanted to get the photograph, that special photograph of the Vulcan, especially as we got to the last season in 2015. So we ended up flying with all sorts of people. This is one of my favourites. It's actually taken just off the coast by Beachy Head. So what sort of aeroplanes did we fly with to get these pictures? Next slide, please, John. Well, this is exactly the aeroplane we took that picture with. I hope it's displayed reasonably clearly for you, but if you can't, there are actually 9 people sat on the back of that ramp. It's about 4,000 feet up, and I have to tell you that looking up at them through my front windscreen made me feel physically sick. I don't really have a head for heights, so I don't understand how people can sit there and do that. From our point of view, what made this sort of thing very difficult was that the Skyvan had a top speed of about 140 knots. And at the fuel weight that we were flying at that point, the Vulcan's landing speed was 140 knots. So for us to actually get into any kind of formation without stalling the aeroplane behind these sort of aircraft was a difficult prospect. Next slide, please, John. Okay, this was another, possibly one of my favourite occasions in aviation, 2014. When the Canadians brought Lancaster Vera across the Atlantic, another exciting epic journey across the Atlantic. To do some flying in the UK, we got to fly with the 2 Lancasters. Sadly, you can't see Vera in this picture because I think the Canadians were a bit wary of my formation flying, so they were keeping a good distance. But again, it does illustrate some of the difficulties in the mixed formations that we flew, because the Lancaster was going pretty much flat out at 165 knots. And again, for the Vulcan, 165 knots at that fuel weight was pretty slow for us. So as you can see, the Vulcan's nose is sticking up in the air a bit, whereas the Lancaster's nose is stuck down because it is absolutely going as quickly as the 4 Merlins can carry it. Again, in terms of where that was, the sea you can see in the background is the wash, and if you look just forward of the Vulcan's fin, I hope you can see a little circle on the ground there, which is an air-to-ground bombing target for the RAF at a place called Holbeach Air Weapons Range. But I have to say, that was a very, very special occasion. Next slide, please, John. Again, as time got in, even the RAF wanted to fly with us. So again, this is us flying with 2 Tornado GR4s, which was nice for me because I'd spent 10 years of my operational career flying as forerunner the GR1. But again, this is a bit of an illustration of the trickiness of doing this sort of thing. The photo ship in this case was an RAF C-130, taken from one of the side doors. The limiting speed for opening that side door is 210 knots, which was the limitation placed on all of us. 210 knots for the Vulcan was a very comfortable speed, but the 2 Tornadoes, as you can see, with the wings swept at 45 degrees, 210 knots is really pretty slow. So they were struggling to stay in formation with anybody at that point. But again, a lovely day out. Next slide, please, John. This one was again 2014. I put it in because it's a nice photograph. It was taken again from that same Skyvan, but on this occasion they were just kind of orbiting above us, which allowed this to get this nice picture of this unusual formation. This was the opening of the Vulcan Air Show in 2015, for which the Vulcan, as it turned out, won the trophy for the best fixed-wing display. Unfortunately, nobody told us we'd won that, and because we were going to be busy the next day, we didn't attend the post-air show party that night, which our Norwegian friends in the two Vampires did, and the Venom and the Vampire did. And so when we failed to collect the prize, they collected the prize on our behalf and promptly took it home to Norway with them, and that was the last we ever saw of it. Next slide, please, John. Okay, there's a couple of clips of video coming up. They're a bit noisy. These are just a couple of my favourite bits. I don't know what your personal favourite Vulcan bits are. The first part of this is what we called the steep wing over, which was something we developed for the last year. Kevin and I both flew it at Riat. It was a much faster entry, so this wing over ended up at about 7,500 feet and was the grand finale to the show. And the second part, I think most people have seen the Vulcan flying with the red arrows. I did it on 3 occasions when I was flying 558. It was fairly easy for me because when I've used to fly a Hawks in formation with the red arrows, that's pretty much, my head was pretty much where you see it now. So all I had to do with the Vulcan was put my head in the same place and forget that there was 111 foot of Vulcan wingspan behind me. It was a great privilege to do this, especially at the Royal International Air Tattoo, and to do it on such a lovely day. I think we'll do, it looks very choppy video. John, we'll go next slide, please. Okay, if you just hold it there. I hope this runs nicely for you. This is a film of a practice display, which we did at RF Scampton on almost the last flight. This is interesting because you can see the Vulcan shadow, but it shows actually the camouflage is quite effective. This film was made by the crew making the Guy Martin film, Last Flight of the Vulcan. They very kindly agreed to film this display. And again, if you see it in its full definition, which you can do as an add-on to the DVD of that show, it is probably the best air-to-air photography I've ever seen of a Vulcan. The thing about the way this was made was that basically the helicopter hovered in the middle of our display line, and we flew various circles around him. The pictures you can see are quite interesting as he zooms in. It's hard to believe that he was never closer than half a mile to us, and actually for most of it, he was probably about a mile away. It's a really terrific camera. Anyway, I'm conscious that time's pressing on and you'll want to be listening to Colin Bell, so if we'll just stop that, chop to the last slide, please, John. And finally, almost exactly 5 years ago, on October the 28th, we flew X-Ray 558 for the last time. It was actually also the last time I ever climbed into an aeroplane to operate it. And in fact, all 4 of us retired from active flying on that day, which enabled me to devote a bit more of my time to the people's Mosquito. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll take any questions if anybody's interested. Has everybody gone shy, John? I saw somebody asking if I've had any involvement with 558 still. Only glancingly. I know they would very much like to reintroduce fast taxi runs sometime in the not too distant future. But at the moment, they're very busy trying to preserve the aeroplane by they're trying to raise money to build a new hangar to home 558 into the foreseeable future. Sorry, John, you there?
Can you hear me, Bill?
I can now.
Fantastic. More questions. From Paul Meads. Bill, what one thing would you say is important to remember when flying the Vulcan?
There's probably a few. Actually, I mean, it is for a big aeroplane. It's the size of a 737. It's very powerful, very agile, a bit like the Mosquito in some regards. It's pretty much a pilot's aeroplane, but it pays to be very aware of the limitations, especially at low speed. We used to display the aeroplane at low speed because if we went too fast, then the radius of turns are enormous. It's like trying to turn an ocean-going tanker. So we flew the aeroplane as slowly as possible, which means that you just have to be very careful that you don't get too slow. Because again, with a big delta-winged aeroplane, the more the angle of attack goes up, then there is a hugely exponential rate of increase in the drag which is generated, which has caught people out in the past. So yes, keep an absolute eye for what the speed was doing is very good.
Fantastic. One question is, did you fly the Vulcan at the Dawlish Air Show?
I have done, yes, I flew it in the last season in 2015. Actually, it was when the weather wasn't very good if you were there, but it was a tragic day. It was the day of the Shoreham accident. We were 15 minutes away from Shoreham when we found out the accident had occurred. And when it became apparent that there'd been a crash, it was difficult for us to decide whether or not to carry on with the rest of our day, which included a short display at Bournemouth and the Dawlish Air Show. In the circumstances, in the end, we decided it was the right thing to do. So, we didn't display at Shoreham, of course, although we were invited to do a high, slow, quiet flight past for the people that were stuck at the air show, which again at the time I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to do, but subsequently people who were there said that actually it was quite comforting for them because they were much more aware of the scale of the disaster. So yes, we carried on. We went to Dawlish, and it was quite a challenging display on quite a tricky day.
Wow. Okay. Question about the ejection seats in the Vulcan. Were they live?
Yeah, absolutely. We flew with 3 crew members. I mentioned that the navigators had been replaced by GPS, but the 3rd crew member was an air electronics officer who was a really important member of the crew. So he did some of the navigating using GPS and things like memory map running on an iPad. But he looked after the electronics in the airplane, it's an absolutely all electric airplane. So without him, we would never even have started it. So yeah, the 2 pilots had quite early model cartridge-fired ejection seats. So there were what they call 090 seats. So provided you were traveling at 90 knots on the ground, then the seat would work and the parachute would work properly. However, if there was any serious rate of descent when we were flying it and you ejected, then they wouldn't work. Of course, that would have been a very serious decision because AEO in the third seat didn't have an ejection seat. He had a seat with basically a large whoopee cushion in it, which he was required to turn through, pushing 180 degrees. This whoopee cushion would sort of boost him out from underneath his bum towards the door, which he had to open underneath the airplane, and then his parachute would open on a static line. So that in itself would have been very difficult. So yes, the seats worked. We were very conscious that we had another guy in the back.
Interesting.
And it was the only Vulcan in the world.
Okay, next question. It's from Nicola. Was it you in that takeoff at Riyadh?
I was in the airplane. Yes, I was sat in the other seat, so I didn't do that takeoff. It was a chap called Kev Rimmins, but I certainly had the best view in the house. It actually got us into trouble with the airshow organisers and the display committee and various other people because they thought it was the turn was a little bit too low. I think we convinced them in the end that it wasn't. But it did require a bit of smooth talking after the show for the heat to die down.
Fantastic. A question from our friend Richard Jackson over in the United States. Good old Mr. Commander Cobra.
Hello, Commander.
He wants to know about your passion for the Mosquito and what you want to bring to this project.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you speak to any military, well, most pilots, but any military pilot and say, which airplane that isn't currently flying would you most like to see flying, or would you like to have a go in? And I'll bet you way over 90% will say the Mosquito. Many of us saw 299 flying until the accident. And it is just a wonderful airplane. Many of us cut our teeth on the stories, which of the Mosquito saying World War. I mean, listening to Des, what's not to like about those stories? But really, I mean, the Mosquito is of the three well-known Merlin-based aircraft, or the four, I suppose, the one which is least trumpeted. And obviously, there are lots of there are even two Lancasters, lots of Spitfires, a number of Hurricanes, and of course P-51s and the like. But the RAF airplanes. But the Mosquito played such an important, and as you've described, wide-ranging role in the Air Force. As you say, it was the first multi-role combat aircraft. And so therefore, in terms of airplanes that I flew, strict lineage, it kind of led to the Tornado that I flew in Germany in the 1980s. So yeah, it was really important. For me, it's just really important to get one flying again, to fly, to educate, to remember. I guess, the strapline says it all.
Fantastic. Question from Stephanie. Is there an aircraft you didn't get to fly but would have loved to, including current ones? I think the Mossie's up there, of course.
Yeah, well, again, it kind of goes back to that because when we first spoke back in 2012, John, I pretty naively thought that we'd have a Mosquito built by 2014 and I'd fly it for you. But of course, that was really naive. Even 558 took sort of 10 years from flash to bang, and they started with an airplane. So yeah, airplanes that I never flew. Let me see. I've been lucky enough to have a go in 40 or so different types of aircraft. But I mean, of the modern aircraft, I think Typhoon is a fantastic aircraft, and it has. Unusually for the Brits, we've taken a leaf out of our American cousins, and actually we've developed the capability of that airplane as it goes along. So I'd love to fly Typhoon. Wartime airplanes. It's difficult. I like the sort of big radial type airplanes. P-38, I think, would be pretty exciting.
Okay. And P-47. Good. Somebody wants to know what's some of your favourite aircraft that you've flown.
Yeah, people always ask me that, and it's probably not fair. Most people will say the airplane that they're flying at that time is their favourite aircraft. But if I get really pushed, then I'd have to say the Hawk. It took me. You've seen it took me to Toronto and back. In the opposite direction, it took me on one occasion to Jakarta, Indonesia, another occasion to Langkawi. All in those little mini hops over some very inhospitable places. And you know what? That lovely Rolls-Royce engine never missed a beat. So, and it was very rugged. It was very simple to operate. It was almost like get in your car, turn the ignition key, and off it went. So yeah, very, very reliable. It was very good for aerobatics, and it was a lovely formation airplane. So yeah, if you push me, I'd say the Hawk. Although this airplane you can see over my shoulder was another fantastic airplane.
Yeah, the Tornado. Good. A question from Casual Videographer. Unusual name. And I know the answer to this question. Have you flown the Harrier?
I did fly the Harrier. Not for very long, I have to say. It was when I started flying in the RAF, I was posted to fly multi-engine aircraft, the Vulcan. After a lot of nagging, the RAF listened to me and posted me to fast jets, and the fast jet they posted me to was the Harrier, which was a bit too difficult for me, if I'm completely honest. This was the GR3 version of the Harrier. But I completed the Harrier OCU, and then after a certain amount of considering my immediate future and the fact my wife had just had our first son, I thought actually there's a sporting chance I'll kill myself doing this. So I withdrew myself from my posting to number 1 squadron actually, and the RAF kindly took pity on me and posted me to the 2-seat Tornado, which was much more comfortable for me. But yes, the Harrier is an absolutely stunning airplane.
Okay. I'm going to combine 2 questions here. Do you have a good memory of a veteran, or what was your childhood kind of hero from aviation?
Oh, well, people have... my mother was a librarian, and I liked reading from an early age, and she used to bring back all of the sort of Second World War related aviation books. Barder, Sanford Tuck, Adolf Gallant, Guy Gibson, you name it, I read it. So they were all heroes. Actually, that I used to, as a child, there used to be two comics in particular. There's one called The Victor, one called The Valiant. I think it was in The Victor that the hero of one of the stories was called Braddock VC. And Braddock VC flew every aeroplane under the sun pretty much, including the Mosquito. And so he was a kind of fictionalized hero. So yeah, lots of hero. Actually, I haven't even covered the people from the First World War. Manic, Ball, all of those people, all of whom the most incredible stories and heroism.
Cool. Next question, and we're going to have to be wrapping up shortly. Will you be displaying them at Moscow?
I would have loved to have done that. I'm a bit too old now, but I will be directly involved with selecting the pilot involved. It's a perennial question, because if you speak to a multi-engine pilot, he'll tell you it has to be a multi-engine pilot because it's got 2 engines, and you have to understand asymmetric for reasons that have been touched on earlier. You speak to a fighter pilot, he'll say it's got to be a fighter pilot because it's a dynamic display. So really, what you want is somebody with my kind of background who's flown dynamic aerobatic type airplanes, but absolutely understands how to deal with a multi-engined aircraft when it's asymmetric. That's with 1 engine failed.
Fantastic.
So yeah, the answer is I would have loved to have done that.
Bill, I'll just let you know there's about half a dozen more questions on the chat. But
Okay.
we, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we need to have a little short break before we bring in our last guest, Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell. So thank you, Bill.
Yeah,
Appreciate everything you do for us. And if you get an opportunity, there's some great questions on the chat.
Okay, I'll take a look on the iPad, which is just down here.
Thank you, guys. And we're going to take a short break, about 10 minutes, and then we'll come on with Colin Bell to wrap things up. Stop complaining. Can't get the staff. Okay. Steve, when I do summary at the end, can you play I'll put my last slide on, because it's got the links and appealing for money. You know what I mean? Thanks. It's ready to go when we get to the end. Colin, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, John. Great to be on your programme.
Thank you, sir. How are you doing?
What can I do for you?
Well, you can talk to us all about.
Talk to you.
Yeah, talk to all the people watching from around the world.
Oh, well, that's marvellous. So, hello to everybody around the world then.
Indeed.
Yeah, John, I told you before you came on that I'm approaching nearly 100 now, 100 in March of next year. So I've got a lot to look back on and a lot to talk about. But you'll have to ask the questions.
Absolutely. And we're going to give everybody else an opportunity to ask questions as well. Yeah. But my first question for you, what prompted you to join the Royal Air Force?
What prompted me to join the Royal Air Force? Well, it was really my father's fault. He used to take me to Hendon Airport. Hendon, it was Hendon Museum, but it was a flying field when I was a youngster, about 8 years old, and I used to see these magnificent men flying around in flying machines, and I thought that's what I'd like to do, but it can never be. But in fact, it happened. But I was very lucky, of course, to be accepted for the Royal Air Force as an aircrew, because at the time I applied, I was been about 19 at the time, I should think there were 100 applicants for every vacancy. So the board who interviewed me up at Oxford were very picky. But anyway, somehow or another I got by, and there we are. That launched me on my career in the Royal Air Force, which I always regarded was a privilege. It was a privilege to be in the Royal Air Force, privilege to be permitted to fly, and most of all, the greatest privilege of all was to fly a Mosquito.
And what aircraft did you train in?
What's that?
What aircraft did you train?
Well, I started off on I started off down in Lakeland, Florida, because I'd been sent out by the Air Force to be trained by the United States Army Air Corps, and I started flying on a Stearman, marvelous aircraft, marvelous powered biplane, and I moved on from there to a place in Macon in Georgia, where I flew a BT-13A, which was the Vulcan, and then finally, of course, I moved on to a place called Napier Field in Dothan, Alabama, where I flew the 86 or Harvard, as you would know it, and magnificent aircraft. And eventually, I graduated with American wings, not British wings, American wings.
So you temporarily were in the U.S. Army Air Force.
I graduated in the U.S. Army Air Force, and as a cadet, I was kicked around something rotten because that's how they treated their cadets. And the only consolation I had was that they treated their air cadets rather worse than they treated us. Because I was about one of 30 people or so. It was a great experience, and I learned a lot.
How long were you over in the United States?
Well, I reckon, including my own training and the time of course, when I finished being trained and I got my wings, I expected to come home, but they held me back along with about 9 or 10 others to be as instructors, because shortly before we graduated, the Japanese had attacked them at Pearl Harbor, the Americans at Pearl Harbor, and the Americans wanted to expand their own training scheme, and of course they hadn't got enough instructors, so they descended on about a dozen of us. And when the station commander, Lieutenant, I think he wasn't a lieutenant general, Colonel Daniel Jr., when he interviewed me, he said, "I suppose you think you're going home?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, you aren't, you're staying over here as an instructor." And I said, "Well, sir, that'll be the blind leading the blind," which he didn't take very kindly to. And he said, "I don't care what you think. You'll be down on the flight line in the morning. You'll have 6 American cadets. You'll be responsible for them. Good day." And that was the end of my discussion with him. So all in all,
how long were you an instructor then?
Yeah. So all in all, I suppose, John, I was out in America for about 2.5 years. I came back to this country in 1943, and I hoped to be a night fighter pilot, and I was sent up to Grantham to train to be a night fighter pilot. But I waited and I waited, but there were no opportunities to get onto a night fighter squadron. So I was recruited by Group Captain Mahedi, who was recruiting sergeant for Don Bennett, and he seduced me by the prospect of flying a Mosquito in the Light Night Striking Force Pathfinder group, and I thought, that's for me. And so I moved out of the night fighter stream and into bomber command, which I suppose at the time was a bit of a dangerous thing to do, but it wasn't really, because the Mosquito was such a fast aircraft, and very, very few, well, hardly any propeller-driven fighters could keep up with it. Yeah, it was a great experience.
What was the squadron number?
608, up at Down Market, where incidentally I shall be going on November the 7th to meet up with a historian out there called Andy Moore. Andy Moore knows more about Down the Market airfield than any man living, and all the squadrons that operated out of there. And it's a bit of a spooky place. Actually, you go into old Nissen huts, and you've definitely got a feeling that there's something or other in the hut. And I've been there before. I'm going back there again. And yeah, I'll see if I can conjure up some spirits.
Well, hopefully you'll be drinking an odd spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. And
how many operations did you do? You do with
well,
608
I did, in all, I did 50, John. But 13 of those were over Berlin, and Berlin was a very nasty Berlin was a very nasty place to fly over. They weren't very kind to us, and they did their damnedest to bring us down. I believe it's true to say that the Luftwaffe pilot that was brought a Mosquito down was credited with 2 kills, not 1. So he moved towards his Iron Cross that much faster if he could knock down a Mosquito or 2. But the loss rate was against fighters was relatively small. But the anti-aircraft fire was absolutely lethal. And on one occasion, a shell landed right up underneath us and lifted us up, and it stopped both engines. And
Wow.
my navigator said to me, "What do we do?" Which I thought was a rather silly question. And I said, "Well, we just wait." And we went on gliding, and eventually, to our enormous relief, certainly to mine, both engines started, and we went on, and we bombed the target and came home. But the whole of the back of the aircraft, mark you, was shred like just as if like a calendar. The holes everywhere, and incredibly, nothing, no control wires had been severed. Because if they had, I shouldn't be speaking to you this afternoon. So yeah, it was pretty dicey. And in the morning, one of the fitters came to me and said, "Sir," he said, "I thought you'd like to have these shell fragments as a souvenir." And I said, "Where have you got them from?" He said, "Oh, we lifted them out of your parachute, you know, the thing you're sitting on." So that was an experience.
Yeah. Very sobering.
Very sobering, yeah. Not often I'm in that happy state as you. If you look at me at the moment, John, you'll see I'm holding a glass. It looks like apple juice. Well, it is apple juice, but it's got a hefty slug of gin in it. So here's to you, John.
And here's to you, Colin.
How?
Indeed. What Mark of Mosquito were you flying?
I flew the Canadian-built Mark 25, and that carried a fairly light load of bombs, just 400 or 500s. The Mark 16, which was an English-built Mossie, could carry a cookie of 4,000 pounds, which twice our bomb load. On the other hand, you can look at it this way. If I went out there and back 50 times and carried a ton of bombs, that was 50 tons of bombs, which is a fair old quantity. And in fact, we carried as much in the way of bombs as a flying fortress. And a flying fortress took twice the time that it took us to go to Berlin and back. And so in theory, at a given time, we could drop twice the amount of bomb tonnage than a flying fortress. And that was a pretty sobering thought for the Americans.
And what heights did you operate at?
Well, normally 25,000 feet, 4 miles to you. And but in point, they had the Germans had wild boar squadrons, as they called them, and they were Focke-Wulf 190s that used to cruise around at about 30,000 feet. And if we were coned by searchlights, as we nearly always were, then they would attempt to come down and intercept. But if you saw them coming, and that was the job of the navigator, then you could probably avoid them. I always did anyway. It wasn't too much of a problem. Yeah.
Good. And so you described how accurate the flak can be.
Sorry?
Was there you described how accurate the flak of a Berlin was?
Yeah, it was a very dangerous place to fly over. There's no question. If you were going to be knocked down, you're much more likely to be knocked down over Berlin than anywhere else. In point of fact, I've described this all to an authoress known as Victoria. What's her name? I don't know. Yes. It's Victoria Panton Bacon. That's the book, and I recommend everybody to read it because there are chapters on all sorts of interesting people. And if you avoid chapter 7, which is all about me, you'll have quite an interesting time. It's a marvelous book written by a very, very talented authoress, and I recommend it to anybody. That's my plug for Victoria.
She'll be very grateful.
Yeah.
Good. So you were able to run the Focke-Wulf 190s. Was there any aircraft that you really worried about on the German side?
I was worried about the jet fighter ME-262 because the ME-262 could fly 100 miles an hour faster than we could. And if one of these chaps locked onto you and he identified you, you were as good as dead. So, but we had a most interesting device in the Mosquito, or in my Mosquito anyway, known as Boozer. And Boozer used to pick up electronic signal from a night fighter radar. And if you saw one of these things, the probability was that it was a jet fighter, or so I've been told. Anyway, on one night, my white light came on, which was very bad news. So I threw the aircraft all around the sky, much to the irritation of my navigator. I got an excellent navigator. He was a Canadian, first-class man, but he got very tetchy because he said, "What are you doing all this for?" And I said, "Because I'm getting warning of a night fighter coming up behind." And he said, "I can't see him." And I said, "No." I said, "If you could see him, he could see you, and we'd both be dead because the firepower of an ME-262 could turn you into confetti with the very first burst." And so I went screaming all over the sky and then down low until finally I lost him. But in point of fact, I never saw the guy. And Doug was not entirely convinced that it was a night fighter on our tail. But I described it to Winkle Brown, Captain Winkle Brown, after the war when I met him. And I said, "Is it correct that the ME-262 night fighters have got radar and were operating?" "Oh, yes," he said, "in small numbers." He said, "You're damn lucky to be alive." So it was by that time I'd lost touch with my Doug. So it wasn't until much later on, in the last 6 years or so, when I did make contact with him, that I reminded him of it.
Indeed. So your connection to Canada didn't finish with flying the Mark 25. After your tour of operation, and I believe you did another job.
I did a what?
What did you do after you finished your tour?
What did I do after I finished operations?
Yes.
After I finished operations, I was given an opportunity to ferry aircraft from London, Ontario, where de Havilland's had a factory, back to this country. And I made a number of trips and delivered a fair old number of aircraft. But after the war, I learnt that the loss rate on ferrying aircraft were greater than on operations. So if I'd known that, I'd have volunteered for a second tour. It would have been less hazardous. But then I didn't know.
Indeed. Any particular story stand out from
What's
ferrying
that?
the aircraft? Any particular story stand out?
Any particular
Any
story
adventures?
stand out? Yes, I think the story. Yes, this will interest you, John. When I was right at the end of the war, I was involved in delivering diplomatic airmail to various embassies in Europe and in Africa. And on one occasion, when I was coming back from Cairo, I landed at a place called Istres, Istres, in southern France. And when I came out of the mess, I was accosted by a warrant officer, and he said, could I have a lift back to the UK with you, sir? And I said, well, that's not really possible because there are only seats for two, and both my seats are taken up, one by me and one by my navigator. Yes, he said, I know. But he said, you can put me up in the nose, the bomb position and bomb aiming position. And I said, well, I suppose I could. So I turned to my navigator and said, Cliff, shall we take him? And Cliff said, well, why not? He said, apparently he's got woman trouble at home. So that clinched it. We decided we'd take him. Well, it's Sod's law, John, that if you do something like this, something will go wrong. And of course it did. We went bouncing along the runway. There was a bloody great bang, and I lost sight of all my instruments because there was so much dust and dirt that all came up off the floor. And I thought we'd lost an engine. So I pulled the aircraft up into the air and kept climbing, and eventually all the dust and dirt receded, and I got ready to feather the defective engine, only to find that both engines were running very nicely. So I said to my navigator, Cliff, find out from that warrant officer whether he can see anything. I said, I'll lower the undercarriage, because I thought very likely it was something to do with the undercarriage. And when I lowered the undercarriage, the word got back to me that the port wheel had disintegrated. Well, that left me with a problem. You'd understand that, John. I either had to do what the good book said, and with undercarriage trouble of this kind, land belly up. But if I did that, I wasn't quite sure whether the nose would collapse, as it sometimes occurred, and my poor warrant officer would have had all his love life problems settled there and then. However, the alternative was to try and land on one wheel. So I decided I'll drop the wing tanks that got extra petrol in over the channel, and I attempted to land on one wheel. The theory being that if I put brake on the starboard wheel and opened up the throttle on the port engine, one would sort of cancel out the other. Well, that was the theory, and it didn't work, because as soon as we lost flying speed, we got tore off the runway at a 45-degree angle and proceeded to roar and bounce all round Blackbush Airport until eventually we came to a standstill. A very, very difficult manoeuvre. Anyway, we got away with it, and I decided to go home and see my wife, a couple of days. So after I'd written out a very brief report, handed it in at the control tower, I shoved off for a couple of days. And when I came back, my navigator said to me, "You're in trouble." And I said, "What, again?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "They've been asking you to report to the control tower." And then he said it got more menacing, and they were telling you to report to the station commander. And this message has been going out ever since you left. So I said, "Oh, well, I better go up and see the old man." So I toddled up to see the station commander, and he said to me, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, I've been back to see the wife, sir, because I thought at least a couple of days to repair the aircraft." He said, "Why didn't you land wheels up?" Well, I couldn't tell him, could I? I said, "I just thought I'd get away with it." And he said, "Well," he said, "it's a good thing for you did get away with it, because he was discussed at group, and group said that if you hadn't got away with it, they'd have court-martialed you." And I said to him, "Sir, if I hadn't got away with it, there'd be nothing left to court-martial." At which point he laughed, and I collected a green endorsement in my logbook. So it all came out all right in the end. But the real point of the story, John, is what an enormously strong aircraft the Wooden Wonder was, because apparently after they took the aircraft into the hangar and put it up on supports, they lowered and retracted the undercarriage, and it worked perfectly. And all they had to do was to put a new tyre on, and bingo, we were away. Now, that just shows, doesn't it, how very, very strong the Mosquito is. So the sooner we get one up in the air, the better.
Absolutely. Now, Colin, you've been back to America in the last few years.
What's that?
You've been back to the United States recently.
Yes. There was a chap called Rod Lewis down in San Antonio, and he bought a Mosquito, a refurbished Mosquito, better than new, and I don't know how much he paid for it, but I did hear rumours that a Mosquito was for sale for $12 million. Anyway, obviously he got a lot of the moolah, and when he heard about me, he was kind enough to offer me a trip. So I went out to Dallas in the first instance because I was attending an event in Dallas, and whilst I was there, I flew down to San Antonio with some marvelous American friends, and I duly went up in the Mosquito, piloted admirably by a chap called Stu, and it was a great experience, and a little bit of light relief. While we were flying around, he said to control, "You may be surprised to know," he said, "that I've got a 98-year-old World War II Mosquito pilot sitting next to me." And there was a brief pause, and control said, "Message from control to pilot." Holy shit.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
You can edit that out
if you like. How did it feel to be back in the Mosquito cockpit?
What's that?
How did it feel to be back in the cockpit again?
Well, I was in the cockpit. You realise I was in the navigator's seat, and it was fantastic. It was a fantastic experience. After 73 years or just incredible. But then the Mosquito's incredible, and what a privilege it was to be in it again. What a privilege to be allowed to fly it during the war. It's I look back on it all and think, I've had an incredible amount of luck throughout. and particularly my service in the Royal Air Force.
Did you always feel the Mossie would get you home?
What's that?
Did you always think that the Mosquito would get you home safe?
Never gave too much thought about it. I thought the Mosquito was so efficient that I would just have to be unlucky not to survive. And I must say that I did have the odd occasion when I had engine failure on a couple of occasions, and but I didn't worry too much about it because I just, when I came back, I put it down into an emergency landing field, and we had two. We had one at Woodbridge, and I think we had one at Manston. And
Manston, yeah.
I know that at Woodbridge they had 3 runways. One was green, which you could land on if you had no particular problem. One was amber, if you had problems, and the last one was red, when you really had no hope of getting the aircraft down safely, other than by crash landing it. And if you were landed on the red, I told they had a bulldozer waiting there just to push it off the runway quickly before the next one came in.
Wow.
Well, in point of fact, we landed on the green on one engine, but it was fairly straightforward. Any competent pilot could have done it. And I seem to remember on another occasion I had to land on one engine at, where was it? Somewhere down on the south coast. But yeah, I know, because I went up to the mess and I was enjoying my egg and bacon, and an orderly came in and said, "Sir, there's an aircraft waiting to take you back to Downham Market." And I said, "Well, you just have to wait, won't we? Because I'm going to enjoy my egg and bacon." And he came back to me a little later on and said, "The pilot's getting VR8 down below, so I think you ought to join him." I said, "No, I'm going to take my time. I don't care." I said, "Even if it's the wing commander himself." And he said, "Well, actually, it is the wing commander." So I got a hell of a drubbing when I got down there from a chap called Alabaster. But I had to appear contrite, even if I wasn't. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Everybody heard earlier that Bill Ramsey, and he took the Red Arrows to Canada and back from Canada. Kind of a similar flying experience to yourself. You know, were the trips interesting, bringing the aircraft back, or were they a bit dull?
What from Canada?
Yeah.
When I was ferrying, yes, very interesting. Yes. The first time I went, we used to stop off sometimes at Dorval, but always at a place called Goose Bay in Labrador. And what I didn't know was that there were mosquitoes up in Goose Bay, and they were the winged variety, you know, the insects, and they were murder, and nobody had warned me in advance. And I woke up in the middle of the night with my whole face and shoulders blotches where these damn things had been feasting off me. In fact, there's a story told that one chap heard one mosquito saying to the other, "Shall we eat him here or take him down to the lake?" Not true, of course, but gives you an idea of how powerful they were. Anyway, I avoided that. And the next time round, I got a bottle of fluid that destroyed them, and I used to spray the room before I went in. Now, what do I remember about? Well, then after Goose Bay, we went out to a place on the west coast of Iceland called Bluey West 1. And I remember flying out to Bluey West 1 on one occasion when there was very low cloud. But I wasn't particularly worried because I knew we were over the sea. And so I let down, and I let down, and I suppose I got to about 150 feet before I broke cloud. And but I was quite confident that, you know, we got some to spare. Well, as I broke cloud, I swept past an iceberg that was poking out of this. Yes, blimey is good word. And I thought, wait, I won't say I narrowly missed it, but if I'd gone down to 60 feet, I'd have certainly hit it. And I thought, you know, had I hit that iceberg and disappeared, no one would have known what caused the accident. And they'd have said, oh, Colin Bell was a pretty experienced pilot, you know, I wonder what happened. Well, it didn't happen, but it was a salutary reminder of how much luck controls your life.
Great. Amazing experiences.
Yeah.
Well, Colin, we've got some questions from the audience.
Yes.
Okay. First question is, what was the Mossie like as a pilot's aircraft, from your piloting point of view?
I'm sorry.
What was it like as a pilot's aircraft to fly?
A pilot's aircraft? Well,
yeah.
You know, before I flew the Mosquito, I've been flying a sort of few clapped out Blenheims, and when you took off from your airfield in a Blenheim, you sort of position yourself in relation to the airfield before you set course. When you took off in a Mosquito and you look back to position yourself, the airfield had gone. It was that fast. And so it was a wonderful aircraft for a pilot to fly. And it had one vicious trait in my experience, and that is because of its power and the force that it used to put torque on the port wheel as you were taking off, it could swing. So you had to be ready to guard against that, or else you could be in a lot of trouble. Yeah, from a pilot's point of view, I always felt that it was better than a Spitfire. I flew in a Spitfire down at Goodwood a few years ago, and somebody said to me afterwards, well, what was it like flying a Spitfire as compared to a Mosquito? And I said, there was not much that a Spitfire could do that a Mosquito couldn't do. And the advantage of the Mosquito was you had two Spitfire engines, not just one.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question. From Joe May in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
He's asking, at what airspeed did you cruise at that during your bombing Pathfinder missions?
Oh, I think we skipped along at about 350 miles an hour,
Wow.
roughly. Sometimes a bit more, but you could go to Berlin and back in just over 3.5 hours, which, you know, pretty good. And but of course, if you went, some of the targets like Munich or Nuremberg were a long distance away, and you had to conserve your fuel as much as you could, because otherwise you could be in trouble. So you wouldn't push the aircraft. You'd try and fly it at a reasonably economical speed. And of course, the slower you went, the less fuel you consumed per hour. But you know, it's a question of you know, choice, balance, call it what you will. But I know that on one occasion we came back from Munich, and I think I got about enough petrol left in the aircraft to fill a petrol lighter, not much more. And where's our friend in America? Where's he come from?
Joe May. Are you California? Joe, you're on the text. So I think are you the West Coast?
On the West Coast.
Oh no, he's not. He's in Florida.
Is he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's where I started my training under the United States Army Air Corps. I was at a place called Lakeland, and they were lovely people. The civilians, they used to queue up and take us out over a weekend. Can't speak highly enough of their generosity. I've been pro-American ever since.
Indeed. A question from Ian Redmond. On the days that you had an operation.
What?
On the day you were on ops.
Okay. Hi.
On the day you were on ops, how did you keep yourself occupied?
Sorry, I still didn't get that.
I'll say it again. On the day you were on operations, how did you keep yourself occupied?
How did I keep myself occupied?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose mainly keeping the aircraft on course, watching the engines, making sure that nothing untoward was happening, and coming back. I had Ian across here to my place in Tunbridge Wells not very long ago. He came as my guest. I was delighted to have him over here. Ian being, of course, the son of my wartime navigator, Doug Redmond.
Correct.
So there's the connection. And
it's Ian asking the question.
Yeah?
It's Ian asking that question.
Ian's asking the question.
Yes. Doug's son.
How did I keep myself occupied? I think what Ian's leading up to was the fact that I used to have naps coming home on when I was pulled away from the target, and after we settled down a bit, I used to say to Doug, "Well, now, Doug, I'm going to take a few cat naps. I've leveled the plane up. I've set course. If it goes off course, give me a nudge. And when we get back to Down Market, give me a big nudge and I'll land the damn thing." And this caused Doug to claim that he could fly the plane as well as I could. Well, he was put to the test on one occasion when my oxygen failed. And that caused me at 25,000 feet to fall unconscious. And where I came to, there was we were doing a spiral at 10,000 feet and still going down. But there was Doug trying to recover me with the aid of an emergency oxygen bottle. So I'm afraid he really couldn't justify his claim after that he could fly the plane as well as I could. But he was a lovely man, and I was incredibly lucky to have him as a navigator. Mind you, I pointed out to him once or twice, he was incredibly lucky to have me as a pilot. But, well, there we are. We got on very well together.
Okay, we've got time for two more questions.
Yeah.
First question. Did you have a lucky charm when flying?
Did I
have a lucky charm at all, or any of the pilots have a lucky charm?
Well, I suppose I ought to have had a lucky charm, but I didn't have a lucky charm. I don't think Doug was my lucky charm because he was such an excellent navigator. He was the best navigator on the squadron. He did laugh a great deal, but that didn't matter. He was a very serious man, and Doug was my lucky charm. Yeah, I hope Ian's here listening to this.
He is.
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
What would you say was your proudest moment in your aviation career?
Proudest moment?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very difficult question. I'm not a very proud man. I suppose I was just incredibly proud to be a pilot in the Royal Air Force and a Mosquito pilot to boot. And I can't wait to see a Mosquito up in the air flying again, because it'd be such a wonderful reminder to the younger generation, and that means nearly everybody below my age, includes you, John, a reminder of one of the outstanding aircraft of the World War II. He could do everything: night fighter, photo reconnaissance, coastal command, Pathfinder, Mossie, ground attack. It could, whatever it was called upon, the Mossie could do it, excepting it couldn't carry a 20-ton tall boy bomb. That, I'm afraid, was down to the Lancaster, but it could do most other things.
I think you've summed it up perfectly, Colin.
You what?
You've summed it up brilliantly.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great pleasure being on your show with you, John. And at this point, I think I shall finish by having the rest of my apple juice with gin. So here's to you, John, and the team.
Your good health.
Your good health.
Thank you, Colin. And that's been a brilliant interview. And I look forward to taking Colin to the RAF Club for some very nice dinner or lunch. Okay, let's summarise today then. Steve, you could just put my last slide on the screen. Thank you. Well, everybody, it's been 3.5 hours. Hopefully you've all enjoyed it. And this has all been about celebrating the Mosquito and bringing awareness about our project to you. 7,781 aircraft were produced, yet there is not one flying in the UK. Therefore, if we've inspired you today, please can you donate, or simply sign up to our regular newsletter, or look at the website. Operation Jericho 2020 is still running. It will run to the anniversary of the raid, which is next February. And we hope to finish these Mosquito fuselage molds with your help. So thank you very much. Stay safe. And no doubt we'll see you on the air show scene next year. Bye for now.